Okay, welcome everyone to the final broadcast in the series for Earth Day this year, co-sponsored by the Midland section of the American Chemical Society and Michigan State University. We welcome our speaker today, Sandra Svoboda from Detroit Public TV. And Sandra has a bachelor's degree in journalism, one in history also from Indiana University, and also has 2 master's degrees from Wayne State University. She has been, before her current job at Detroit Public TV, she was 5 years at WDET-FM in Detroit. And she has lots of experience in digital radio, TV, documentary, and mentoring format. Her work has also been recognized by various organizations in Midland, including the State Bar and Michigan Associated Press. Today, Sandra is going to preview a Detroit Public TV program that hasn't come out yet about the impact of climate change on Great Lakes cities.
Hi, well, thanks so much for that, and thanks to everybody joining online. So what I want to introduce you all to the Great Lakes Now initiative at Detroit Public Television, and then I'll give you a sneak preview of our latest show. It airs a week from tomorrow, but I have some of the videos, and we can talk a little bit about some of the issues that are involved there. So Great Lakes Now, the Detroit Public Television station has always been interested in energy and the environment for years, predating me. I've only been there a year and a half. And so what we've really evolved to is what we have now, which is our monthly television show. We have daily online reports, news and information on our website, greatlakesnow.org. And then we also have a collection of lesson plans, which proved very fortuitous when we got those in our grant a couple of years ago. They are on our page, and I'll show you in a moment. They were written originally more for educators, and now with parents and other caregivers doing so much at home now and activities and schooling, that we're seeing a lot of traction in those, a lot of people visiting the site, and we're working on adapting them for other people other than teachers. And then we also do events. Well, we used to. We do them online now, but we do a whole range of engagement around the area and really the region. So the TV series is just celebrating its 1-year anniversary next week. It will be official. We have a monthly show. We cover a range of topics about the Great Lakes, and we're a regional show. We don't just do environmental, we do life in the Great Lakes. We do science, we do some about industry, we do tourism. The slide you're looking at is actually missing our 12th and 13th episodes. But you can see at the very beginning, the episode 1 there that was a visit to South Bass Island and Lake Erie that had that's a picture of the Put-in-Bay sailing team. The freighter you'll recognize, it's going through the Welland Canal in the 2nd episode. The 3rd episode was a historic photo from the Cuyahoga River burning. The 4th episode, we checked in with Enbridge Line 5 and Parks, which was our newest national park in the Great Lakes. And then the cruise ship to the right, and so on. All of these thumbnail photos represent different episodes we did, usually 3 segments in a show. And we try to get around the lakes and give everybody an idea of what's going on. And what we like to say is we take you to someplace in the lakes in a way you have not been there before. So we might go to somewhere that's familiar to you, but maybe we go underwater there, or maybe we go inside some infrastructure. We have a really huge regional focus. These are all stations, PBS affiliates that carry us. We were also picked up by the Bay County Public Channel. So we're really trying to reach all 8 of the Great Lakes states, and then some of these signals broadcast into Ontario, because 2 of the Canadian provinces touch Great Lakes watershed. Of course, Ontario, which wraps all the way around the top, and Quebec as you go out the St. Lawrence. So I have to get them to add the St. Lawrence to this map. Because we really do consider that part of the basin and having the same issues. The website is greatlakesnow.org. This is just a glimpse of what's on it. We carry original news stories written by our staff, our freelancers, our collaborators within the media. We do some aggregation. You see Great Lakes News Energy Roundup every 2 weeks. We do a collection of the most important headlines and stories about energy issues related to the Great Lakes. And then we also carry news from the Associated Press. So we get a really good mix of professional coverage of the biggest issues. We can't have reporters in all the state legislatures, but at least we can keep an eye on what they're doing related to the lakes, and Congress as well, through these partnerships that we have. And then, as I mentioned, we also have the education. So if you go back, you can see in the menu bar, this right here, education. If you click on that, you get to this part on the left. So I updated it today because we're actually airing shows this week, and I made it link into the curriculum much easier. But as you scroll down this page, you get those 2 collections of lesson plans. They were all written by a teacher, former Michigan Teacher of the Year named Gary Abood. And then we also have a virtual field trip. And so that's a clip of it from the right. It's just a photo, but we have 3 5-minute virtual field trips around coastal wetlands, algae, and sturgeon that were done down in Lake Erie. And those are really fun. We've had those being shared nationally and even internationally in this time when people are looking for ways to engage online. So this link will get you to all of those lesson plans if you're looking for things to do. And then the top here, this post, if you click on the here, it'll come into the homepage. It's a story on greatlakesnow.org that has the 5 episodes that we're airing this week with the specific lesson plans between 2 and 7 of them for each of those. So we're pretty busy at Great Lakes Now. This is also sort of it seems like a long time ago now, but some events that we've done. On the left was the Thunder Bay International Film Festival. That's the opening gala. That's me, super flattering photo with our host. Ward Detweiler hosts our show, and you'll see him in a moment. The second picture going left to right is Ward Detweiler with Julia Ruffin, who's from the Oakland County Water Resources Commissioner's Office. They have a talk show called Water by the Quarter that airs on Facebook, and they dig into water issues, drinking water issues for Oakland County and beyond. And the right is Natasha Blakely, our news director, and former multimedia producer Rick Mixter. They're doing student radio in Flint. And then the upper right is Gary Abood. That's at the Michigan Science Teachers Conference in early March, where we rolled out our new lesson plans for this year. So we really try to get around the region. We've done all kinds of events and film festivals, and we talk to classes, and now we do Zoom things, sometimes formal, sometimes informal. We met with a group of students in Minneapolis. It was kind of a sister of a friend kind of situation. And we showed some segments and walked those students through what we do, really trying to make the links between our content. What are we putting on air? What's the news on our website? And to what extent can we use that to help families and students really learn more about the Great Lakes? The events are the same way. We really look at those to meet our audience. Public media, both public radio and public TV, have a very different relationship with audience than a lot of commercial media. We like to go out and talk to audiences. We like to hear from audiences. We want to know what you're interested in and what your questions are and how we can meet your information needs. And so we also have a lot of ways to do that online. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, we're on Twitter. I'll give you my Twitter handle at the end. We have a YouTube channel that you can subscribe to. And then we also have several modules on our website where we seek questions from people. What would you like to hear about? What would you like us to cover? So I tried to put kind of the routing, but if you go to news and issues, there's a drop down, and then there's questions, and you'll see either suggest a segment or ask a question about the Great Lakes or ask a freighter captain. Or we've done a lot of coverage around PFAS chemicals, so you can ask questions about that as well. And we have looped some of that into our coverage and actually had people send us video of themselves asking their questions, or now we'll use Zoom and put that on our program. None of this would be possible without our sponsors. This is a list of them this year, and we always want to thank viewers like you. If you're a PBS member, thank you so much for supporting our work. It gets you the Passport app now, which we've been seeing a lot of increased traffic on that. So we are, of course, supported like other nonprofits by our generous donors, foundations, and individuals. So what are we doing now? Well, normally our show is a collection of 3 episodes that we produce, sometimes in partnership with the stations around the region. We try to seek out, something seasonal. What's in the news? What can we do? Stations don't always show us, within the same weeks. And so sometimes it's a few months later. So you're never going to see like a full winter segment or a full summer segment, but things that will carry on. And we really usually we don't usually have a full theme for each show, except this month, because we're part of this big project supported by the Pulitzer Center. They had a Connected Coastlines project where they granted nonprofit media, actually for profit as well, around the country to do coverage of climate change, what climate change means to coastlines. So of course, that's much of climate change, and the research has been focused on the oceans and the rising oceans. But we wanted to take a look at what climate change could mean in the Great Lakes. We have seen the increase in water levels around the region. To what extent is that driven by climate change? And then of course, what are we doing about it? We don't want to just point out the problems. We want to look at some of the solutions. And so this project actually launched today. NCA, which is there, the logo's there. They wrote an overview story that's right on our website. And then you'll see work from each of these outlets over the next 10 days, including us with our show, all digging into a different part of what this issue is and how it's playing out in the region. And so I will show you, we'll see how we do on time. All right, so let me begin the segment. So what you're gonna see is the host and our opening, and then the host will introduce, and then there'll be an intro segment where a lot of the journalists explain the project, and then we'll watch the first segment on the harmful algal blooms. And so I'll check in on the chat after that, and we'll see how we do on questions. There's 3 longer episodes. There's the intro, and then there's 3 episodes, algal blooms being the first one. So we'll kind of see how we do on time and questions and play through.
This program is brought to you by the Fred A. and Barbara M. Erb Family Foundation, Lori and Tim Wadhams, the Richard C. Devereaux Foundation for Energy and Environmental Programs at Detroit Public Television, the Polk Family Fund, Eve and Jerry Young, the Americana Foundation, the Brookby Foundation, and
the Consumers Energy Foundation is committed to serving Michigan, from preserving our state's natural resources and sustaining our future, to continuing business growth, academic achievement, and community involvement. Learn more at consumersenergy.com/foundation.
and viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ward Duttweiler. Welcome to Great Lakes Now. This month, our show is going to look a little different. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, we've had to produce our stories in new ways, and sometimes shoot with webcams or smartphones. This episode is also different because it's part of a collaborative reporting project called From Rust to Resilience: What Climate Change Means for Great Lakes Cities. Here are some of the journalists who participated to tell you about it.
From Rust to Resilience is a collaboration of 8 newsrooms across the Great Lakes Basin, brought together by the Institute for Nonprofit News.
It's a look at how climate change is affecting the Rust Belt cities along the Great Lakes.
It's a really critical issue that's going to affect all parts of our society in the future.
This is the entire world, our entire existence on this planet. So there's nothing more important than talking about climate change.
There are a lot of challenges related to climate change in the Great Lakes.
It's going to be extremes. Erosion on these lake shores, increased tick and mosquito-borne diseases.
Heat waves, which can kill many people in cities, as we saw in Chicago in the 1990s. And then flooding. A lot of these Great Lakes cities are extremely vulnerable to urban flooding.
It's amazing how many people don't have flood insurance.
We're seeing increased storms, increased erosion, increased heat in the cities.
But the good news is that the threat of climate change also presents an opportunity for new innovation and new economic development.
There are solutions.
We're going to look at some of the creative solutions that people have proposed all across the Great Lakes.
And we are all working together to try to tell the broadest story that we can. If we all combine our resources, we can tell a deeper story.
These stories are part of the Pulitzer Center's Connected Coastlines reporting initiative. The harmful algal blooms in western Lake Erie have been a problem for years. Climate change is likely to bring increased precipitation and more frequent storms. And both those factors could make the blooms worse.
Every summer, usually around the beginning of July, western Lake Erie transforms into something resembling pea soup.
We are on Lake Erie, headed to Luna Pier. The week after the forecast, we started seeing the bloom start, and the bloom has grown almost exponentially since then.
Eddie Verheim is a project engineer with Limnotech. A good part of his summer is spent maintaining environmental monitoring buoys on Lake Erie.
So we've seen it almost double, triple, quadruple in size in about a 2-week period. So it's covering about 300 square miles right now.
Eddie is one of an army of scientists and researchers who have converged on Lake Erie to study and predict harmful algal blooms.
Many of these freshwater blooms, they're actually a type of bacteria that are referred to as cyanobacteria.
Dr. Gregory Dick is a research scientist at the University of Michigan. His lab's research is helping us understand the genetic makeup of harmful algal blooms in Lake Erie.
And so these cyanobacteria are the organisms that originally invented oxygen-producing photosynthesis billions of years ago. But for historical reasons, they've also been called blue-green algae, and that sort of informal name sticks with the cyanobacteria. The blooms that we're seeing in Lake Erie represent an unnatural flux of nutrients.
Understanding and predicting harmful algal blooms in Lake Erie begins deep inside the agricultural heartland of Ohio.
When you think of anything that, even us, anything that anybody needs to live, we have a certain number of nutrients that are required. The first thing is carbon.
Dr. Laura Johnson is the director of the National Center for Water Quality Research at Heidelberg University. Her team tracks nutrient data, which help predict the scale of blooms in Lake Erie.
Plants, they can fix carbon from photosynthesis. But the other two big things we need is nitrogen and phosphorus. So phosphorus is just one of those things that we need to apply to soil to make sure that we get good crop growth. Turns out, if you apply something to the soil that can run off, algae, even cyanobacteria, they're not all that different from the plants you're trying to encourage to grow. And if that stuff runs off and gets into a lake, they're encouraged to grow too. And those situations, when you get a lot of runoff, that's when you start to see big algae blooms.
When you have lots of nutrients and you have warm temperatures in the summertime and you have calm waters, that is conducive to the growth of what we call bloom-forming bacteria, cyanobacteria, that grow to really high densities and that produce certain toxins, certain molecules that are of concern due to their toxicity.
We started detecting harmful algal blooms in Lake Erie in the late 1990s. They were large enough to see from satellites starting in about 2002. The 5 worst blooms that we've ever seen on Lake Erie have all occurred since 2011. The problem's getting worse.
And we're getting close to the water intake crib for the city of Toledo. There's a funnel there that goes back to the pump station on shore. During 2014, there was a very large algal bloom very close to the water intake crib, but the city didn't really know that the bloom was there until they started sucking it into their water intake. Bad water was already at the plant. That was when the Toledo water crisis happened. Folks couldn't drink water in the city.
It was the highest toxicity of any of the blooms in the last 4 or 5 years.
Dr. Rick Stumpf is an oceanographer with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science.
For a drinking water plant, it's really easy to remove the toxin if it's in the cells. You just settle the cells out, all the toxin's gone. If the toxin's dissolved in the water itself, not in the cells, they have to use chemical treatment. It's harder to do, harder to get rid of it. All these cells were being broken open, releasing all of their toxin, and this is a really toxic bloom. And it was early, so the combination was a surprise. It won't happen again. Might happen somewhere else. Won't happen in Toledo because we now have things we didn't have in 2014 in July.
500,000 Toledo residents experienced a 72-hour drinking water crisis as a result of harmful algal blooms in 2014. Since then, a web of monitoring sondes, or sensors, have been deployed as sentinels for water quality and public health.
We're coming up on our buoy. This is the Limnotech water quality weather buoy that was installed about 2 weeks after the water crisis, and it's been here every summer since then. We have a water quality sensor on this buoy. It's measuring turbidity, it's measuring chlorophyll, how green is the water. We're also measuring for harmful algae or blue-green algae.
Andy McClure is the water administrator at Toledo's Collins Park Water Treatment Plant.
In 2014, we didn't have the data science. We couldn't react quickly to changes in the lake. Like, we knew lake conditions were changing several hours after they've already changed. So that's one of the big things at data science, the buoy and the science in our intake crib and those service. We know right away when water quality is changing.
So when there's a bloom going on, we combine instruments in the water samples, and the satellite data and say, here's where the bloom is now, here's how toxic it is, this is where we expect it to be tomorrow, the next day.
Whereas we've gotten pretty good at forecasting the size and movement of blooms, we're in the very early stages of being able to forecast or predict toxicity. And so that's where we're hoping some of the studies that my lab and others are doing are going to inform models that could allow us to make forecasts and predictions about toxicity.
We know that the harmful algal blooms are driven by the amount of phosphorus that comes in during the spring. The spring of 2011 and the spring of 2015 were incredibly wet springs. As a result, we had huge amounts of phosphorus go into the lake, and we had the biggest blooms that we've ever seen. We want to keep the agricultural production high. We need that food. If everyone would not apply more than is needed and would insert it into the soil when it was applied, those two actions alone would reduce the amount of phosphorus leaving the agricultural fields by over 60%, and we only need a 40% reduction.
So if you listen to anybody these days talking about how do we fix this problem, that's one of the things that always seems to come up. It's a nutrient management issue. I think we have a lot of good theories as to exactly why we've seen these dissolved phosphorus losses and then what practices are going to fix them. But we haven't been able to see that play out on the ground as much as we would like.
Adding to the challenges of balancing agricultural production and managing nutrients, the scientific community is now grappling with an emerging driver of bloom formation: climate change.
We haven't even made a little bit of progress in reducing that flow-weighted mean concentration. We've got to take this much more seriously. We now know that 70 to 90% of the phosphorus that comes into the lake comes in during the 10 worst storm events each year, and we're seeing every year more frequent, severe storms.
The frequency and the size and the magnitude of these blooms is increasing. That has been well documented, and it's thought that that is tied to this excess nutrients, so increasing amounts of nutrients that are coming into natural waterways. It also has to do with climate change, both in terms of increasing temperatures as well as increasing precipitation, which increases nutrient loads from land into lakes.
The overarching looming thing that we're going to be challenged with moving forward is climate change. We're seeing more extremes on both ends of the spectrum. If we have more intense rain events early in the spring followed by drought conditions later in the summer, that is worst case scenario for bloom formation, because hot, dry, long periods of time after we've had big inputs into the lake, that leads to big blooms. And so the question is, well, if that's our scenario and that's what's going to be happening moving forward, then we need to be prepared. In mid-century, because of climate change, it might just lead us to where we are right now, which means we're maintaining the current frequency of severe blooms, which is good, but then that means we haven't made any progress. We need to come up with some new technologies and novel ideas with how to deal with lots of water moving across the ground, and then subsequently no water.
We have more on Lake Erie's harmful algae blooms at greatlakesnow.org.
Okay, my volume looks like it's working. I had one question come in on the chat asking when this program will air on PBS. It depends on which station you mean. On Detroit Public Television, it will be a week from tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. But if you go to our website and you find the episode page, there are links to all of the stations that air us, and those links, the station name will go to their schedule page, and then you can search on there for Great Lakes Now. Or if you have a specific city and you want to email me, I can try to look it up. in that regard. And then, let's see. Do I have another question? I got one in chat and no open questions. Okay. If nobody else has a question, I will go keep on the program and we'll watch the second segment.
Of course, phosphorus and nitrogen aren't the only things we want to keep out of the lakes. Climate change will probably mean bigger storms, and stormwater can drive untreated sewage into the lakes. In Buffalo, they're taking aggressive action to keep that from happening with green infrastructure.
In his 2020 State of the City address, Buffalo Mayor Byron Brown delivered some big news.
We are investing $400 million in water quality capital improvements over 20 years, with the largest environmental impact bond in America's history. And I want to thank O.J. McFoy and his team for putting together that plan.
O.J. McFoy is the general manager of the Buffalo Sewer Authority. The city's $30 million environmental impact bond will help the authority keep the city's wastewater out of the Niagara River.
We were established in 1935. The treatment facility was finished in 1938 here in Bird Island. Before that, the city of Buffalo simply had a system of trunk sewers that just released out here into our Niagara River. After time, we found that, that's probably not the best idea, but we were able to connect those systems and get them to our treatment facility and then having clean water come out the other end. Over the years, we've been making gradual improvements not only to our system of trunk sewers that stretch out over 850 miles throughout our city, but also to our treatment facility as we've been going along.
Like many older cities, Buffalo's combined sewer system was engineered to carry away sewage, industrial wastewater, and storm runoff in the same pipe and as quickly as possible to then be cleaned at its wastewater treatment plant. But with the ever-increasing effects of climate change, maintaining clean water with this combined sewer system has become a monumental challenge.
Climate change is having a big effect in the city of Buffalo. What is happening here is we are getting more and more intense storms. Some of those storms have broken records. Some individual climate change concerns that we are dealing with in the city of Buffalo really are focusing on urban flooding and combined sewer overflows.
Large storm events can overwhelm the sewer system, sending raw sewage directly into nearby streams and rivers.
Storm waste is you get the rain falling and it picks up everything off of the streets. So whether that's the oils, the greases, the trash, those things coming from animals, it picks all of that stuff and just puts it into our waterways.
The City and Sewer Authority have been working to reduce stormwater runoff and combined sewer overflows. One solution, an ambitious green infrastructure program called Rain Check.
For green infrastructure, we're looking to spend nearly $100 million installing projects throughout the city of Buffalo. We have over 9 miles of green streets. We have been dealing with our vacant lots throughout the city of Buffalo as well.
Kevin Meindl, who works with OJ at the Buffalo Sewer Authority, is a landscape architect. He specializes in green infrastructure city planning.
Here in the city of Buffalo, we have a lot of impervious areas. Almost over 56% of our city is actually hard infrastructure. So that's pavement, concrete, asphalt, and it's just really lacking in green space and tree canopy. So green infrastructure is using natural systems to manage stormwater runoff where it falls. So when it rains, that water is now able to enter into the ground, into a planted area with soils and plants and trees, and allow it to mimic the natural water cycle throughout our city.
Green infrastructure can include rain gardens, planters, tree plantings, and parking lots made of porous asphalt. And it can do more than fight the effects of climate change.
We can transform street corridors, provide greater access to green space, reduce air pollution as well as water pollution, and really improving just the overall aesthetic of our community.
The Sewer Authority team is currently overseeing its largest green infrastructure project to date, the redesign of Niagara Street. When finished, it will be the longest green street in Buffalo.
When Niagara Street is complete, that will be a 4.5 5-mile green corridor. We will be installing green infrastructure to capture all of that runoff there and make sure that that is treated right there on the site, utilizing vegetative processes, utilizing under the sidewalk storage, as well as some pervious pavement areas.
So here we are on Niagara Street, where we're currently constructing rain gardens to manage the stormwater runoff from the road and the surrounding areas. These sites are made with a 50% compost and 50% sand mixture that allows water to really infiltrate into the ground while still providing nutrients for the plants to grow and thrive. In total, we'll manage over 15 acres of impervious area and manage over 800,000 gallons of stormwater runoff each year.
Our Niagara Street project, when it is completed, will be one of our crown pieces that we have throughout the city of Buffalo. 4.5 miles of a green, safe, bicycle-friendly, pedestrian-friendly corridor.
While Buffalo city officials have had much success in green infrastructure planning in the public domain, the new $30 million environmental impact bond will allow them to extend their reach even further.
So our $30 million that we are looking to invest in our specific communities really is focused in on growing green infrastructure outside of the right-of-way and the public space where we have been playing, and really getting ourselves into private communities and in private land. We're going to be working with community organizations, religious institutions, private businesses, but we want to make sure that we utilize these funds that we receive as a catalyst for ensuring that the city of Buffalo deals with the climate realities of this stormwater and these intense storms going forward.
For more on how communities are working to keep sewage from polluting the Great Lakes, visit us at greatlakesnow.org. Last winter, Chicago's lakefront took a beating from high lake levels combined with powerful storms. Damage was so severe it prompted the mayor to declare parts of the lakefront a disaster area, and City Council declared a climate emergency.
On January 11th, Chicago was hit with a massive storm that whipped up 23-foot waves on Lake Michigan and ravaged the city's waterfront. Patty Wetley is a journalist who's covered the storm's effects.
Chicagoans are actually used to wacky weather. We kind of, thrive on it and pride ourselves on it. But when you start to get even extremes for here, then people are like, oh my God, that, we're used to craziness, but not things like that. People, they were losing power, freezing cold out. It was so miserable. Lake Michigan is no joke. These are the Great Lakes. They're huge. And Lake Michigan, it's deep, it's big, it's huge, and it has power.
On the city's far north side, the storm pounded several beaches, leaving neighborhood residents on edge.
It's really bad. And you hear crashing waves all the time. It's like you're living on the Pacific Ocean.
I dread a big storm now. I've seen enough big storms in my life. I don't need to see new ones because now they're doing damage.
After the storm, City Council passed a resolution declaring a climate emergency.
Resolution 2020-81. Resolution is a declaration of a climate emergency and calls for the initiation of an emergency climate mobilization effort.
Citing catastrophic lakefront erosion, citywide flooding, and severe unseasonal weather, it calls for a climate mobilization on a scale not seen since World War II. Chicago Alderman Matt Martin co-sponsored the resolution.
We're in a climate change emergency. This is a crisis. You're gonna see flooding be more frequent and more serious. You've seen what's happened with our lakefront. It's a crisis here.
Paul Wheeler has lived near several Northside beaches since 1991.
Just a few years ago, you could walk along long stretches of sand that are now completely underwater, several feet underwater. So when a wave comes in now, it does a lot of damage because there's nothing to stop it. It just rolls right up on land. To me, it's all about the lake level.
The lake, which is an even bigger problem, we've seen over the last number of years a 6-foot rise. I think it's risen by approximately 6 feet since 2013.
Satellite images confirm how Chicago's beaches have been shrinking as the lake levels have risen, and it's not expected to stop anytime soon.
The peak typically happens in the summer,
and it looks likely that we will be breaking some more monthly records through the spring.
Mark Wagstaff is a senior waterfront engineer with Smith Group. The firm has been studying the lakefront for Chicago's Park District to develop a plan for the future.
The purpose of this plan is really to take a comprehensive look at the whole system and to make some recommendations for, urgent needs and then longer term, management.
That becomes trickier when you factor in the effects of climate change.
Some of the impacts will tend to drive more water in the lakes, so more intense precipitation, which is more runoff in the area. So I think some of the best science at the moment says that what we should expect in the future is increased variability.
In Chicago, with the lake, we're going to have to be dealing with these extreme highs and at the same time extreme lows. And where those cycles might have been 10, 15, 20, 30 years apart in the past, now they're going to start cycling through faster.
The threat to the lakefront posed by high water is visible right now. The Calumet Park Beach House is nearly swamped and most of the beach is gone.
It's right up to the beach there that under normal conditions would be a pretty large beach, is completely covered, and there's facility that's right there on the water that it's getting close.
But there's also been success along the lakefront, which may serve as a blueprint for the future. During the last decade, Loyola Beach has been transformed into a dune habitat.
There have been a huge movement, I would say, by the Park District and by residents as well to restore native habitat. And there's been new plantings of plants that do particularly well grow in sand.
Those natural plantings are much more resilient. So even after a storm, those deep-rooted plants help to hold the sand in place. But it's also a terrific habitat for particularly a lot of the migratory birds.
A long-sloping beach also helps fight erosion.
And that shallower slope helps to dissipate some of the wave energy. Rainbow Beach down on the south side of the city is another one where that shallow slope is really good.
Since the January storms, the Park District and Army Corps of Engineers have been shoring up Howard, Rogers, and Juneway beaches.
They're rebuilding now, they're putting these new rocks and trying to reinforce it. But it was a great little beach before. I mean, you could go out for 2 blocks and still only be this deep, all sand, beautiful.
It's a temporary fix until a long-term solution is agreed upon. Recommendations were expected this spring, but they've been delayed by stay-at-home orders.
We're living in a time of profound uncertainty and instability. However Chicago goes, that's how Illinois is going to go, and we can be in a position to help guide where the entire country is going to go from a policy standpoint.
Thanks for watching. For more on how cities around the Great Lakes are responding to climate change, visit greatlakesnow.org. When you get there, you can follow us on social media or subscribe to our newsletter to get updates about our work. See you out on the lakes. These stories are part of the Pulitzer Center's Connected Coastlines Reporting Initiative.
This program is brought to you by the Fred A. and Barbara M. Erb Family Foundation, Lori and Tim Wadhams, the Richard C. Devereaux Foundation for Energy and Environmental Programs at Detroit Public Television, the Polk Family Fund, Eve and Jerry Young, the Americana Foundation, the Brookby Foundation, and
the Consumers Energy Foundation is committed to serving Michigan, from preserving our state's natural resources and sustaining our future, to continuing business growth, academic achievement, and community involvement. Learn more at consumersenergy.com/foundation.
and viewers like you. Thank you.
All right, so that's a sneak preview of the show. You're the first to see it, of people who don't work at the TV station. Does anybody have any questions? It's really, I'm always struck by a couple of things in these topics. One is the extremes, but they're full of uncertainty. I think every climate scientist or hydrologist or people who work in the lakes will tell, who track this will tell you, they kind of know what indicators are for trends, but then, they can look from year to year, but depending how much rain we get in a springtime, it's sometimes a lot more and sometimes a lot less, and that they can't predict. It's just the cycles are sometimes closer together, sometimes farther apart, but just the unpredictability and the volume in either direction. I know here in Detroit, we have really high water for this time of year already, and so we think we're looking at another, I don't know, maybe 6 inches even above last year. And then I just think, those pictures of the Chicago waterfront put it all in perspective. People who don't see the Great Lakes every day or are new to the area, you forget how powerful they are. They're inland seas, and those waves, I've been out in 20 and 25-foot waves on the lakes, and we forget how much damage they can do to the lakefront, and it's really hard to plan for those effects as well. So Kristen, I'm curious to know what studies have been or are being done regarding the rise in lake levels for Lake Superior. Good question. Kind of the same way for, oh, my cat is making an appearance. Okay, so kind of the same way for all of the lakes. The University of Minnesota Duluth actually has a research vessel, and they have buoys that are out, as well as some mini submarine kinds of things that are monitoring all the time. One of the things with Lake Superior is that the water only comes out through the St. Mary's River, which is smaller, narrower, and so evaporation and depending on ice cover can have some variability as well. But the Army Corps of Engineers also does tracking. Those studies are online with weekly updates. So specific to Lake Superior, the university's up there, but the Army Corps really tracks it for the whole system, as do other researchers, because the lakes are all connected. And so what's happening in Lake Superior now is going to affect us in Detroit within sometimes a few years. It takes the water to get here, but the weather systems and patterns can be the same. They are affected more by more Arctic air flows first up in Lake Superior, but as those systems move down, we get throughout the region as well. All right. Cities in Michigan, what cities in Michigan are making major investments in green infrastructure? So a lot of them actually, and that is we would have had more of that, but for the pandemic, we are on a lockdown at the station and not traveling. So one of our original ideas was to do some of those smaller cities and compare them and their budgets. Same thing on the reporting side. We have that on our list of stories to do. We're looking at whether there's some uniform way we could track green infrastructure building or lakefront improvement, or some way we can kind of make an apples to apples comparison in our reporting. I will tell you that the way a lot of cities are doing it is through, tourism, waterfront redevelopment, economic development. So when things are done for reasons, of tourism, they have the added benefit of green infrastructure. So that's kind of nice, right? Because you don't have to just sell it as a climate change reactive project. You can also say we can do, for example, here in Detroit, we have the Riverwalk, and there's a lot of opportunities for small businesses to go in, creating that access to the waterfront, while at the same time doing the design, as they talked about in Buffalo, with some of the green infrastructure, the rain gardens, make places that play into that as well. So you're really seeing that in some smaller communities on smaller levels, which is nice, because it doesn't have to be a $30 million bond and redo project. Some of these things can be done in incremental projects that go towards a master plan.
Sandra, this is Gina. I don't have the ability to get into Q&A, but do you know where the money comes from for these various green infrastructure projects?
A variety of places. So sometimes you'll have a city like Buffalo that does a dedicated bond for that. sometimes you'll see monies in just, routine maintenance or, street maintenance. We had, about, gosh, 10 years ago, you heard a lot about complete streets, which was the idea of designing streets for all users. In other words, not just cars, but to put in bike lanes or curb cuts for strollers and wheelchairs and turnoffs for buses. And so you're seeing a little bit of the same in infrastructure building. Those projects, it may be funded by a transportation related grant, but have those provisions in there. So there is some crossover. So sometimes I've also seen private funding. Port Huron, for example, I think it's Port Huron or St. Clair. They have a riverfront redevelopment that was actually spearheaded by private, and the same thing, lots of partnerships within that model as well. The Detroit Riverfront is done that way. The Riverfront Conservancy is its own organization, but it's worked with philanthropic, corporate donors to then work in turn with the city and its master plan for that kind of building. So funding, coming in through various grants, infrastructure projects, and then when there's a chance to do it through maintenance, that can be done. And so, I've seen that happen within the bicycling community in Detroit, where when a project was being done, a road, a cyclical road repair, the cycling and complete street advocates get involved and say, hey, while you're doing it, why don't you do it this way at very little extra expense sometimes. Let's see. Okay, the comment, that's great as far as selling green projects via tourism, but that does not help educate citizens as to the problems and concerns. And then a question about, that's a good, can't say I disagree. I think, that's why we do our program. That's why we do an education component. I think, a lot of making, it's hard to get some audiences excited when you say, I want to tell you about stormwater. But boy, after the floods of 2014 that we had down here in August in Southeast Michigan that year, and so many people's basements flooded and there were cars stranded on the roadway, all of a sudden those severe storm events like hurricanes were not just happening across the Southeast. That was something that people could relate a little bit more to. So unfortunately, sometimes it takes, crises to make people aware. And then there's a question, are you aware of or planning efforts to evaluate the multiple benefits and post-implementation maintenance of green infrastructure projects? Coming from nonprofit media now, with our funders are very interested in evaluation, and I've seen that across the board. There usually is an evaluation component to that type of funding, whatever discipline or industry you're in. I'm not aware of like a massive, one. I think, Emily, that was your question. If you wanted to email me if you were looking for a particular community or project, we could help look into that a little bit. Any other questions? The newsletter address, somebody is looking for that. If you go to our website, there's a subscribe button at the top. So it'll just ask you for your email address and you can put that in, and then you'll get our newsletter. I should mention that we, in addition to all the social media, we also send out a newsletter on Wednesdays that updates you on news on the site, when we're having a new episode, events we're doing, and has some opportunity for feedback there as well. But let me pop up as we're kind of closing out, let me pop up all right, well, on Twitter, I am DET Sandra, and my email address is first initial last name, so S Svoboda at DPTV, like Detroit Public Television, dptv.org. So any more questions or story ideas for us or suggestions about the show, that would be great.
Happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day. Thanks so much for having me and being on with us.